Thanks for staying with us. You're watching Daybreak on this morning, this 25th of October 2021. We want to continue giving you updates regarding that developing story out of Sudan, where we are receiving reports that Sudan's Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok has been put under house arrest after an unidentified military force besieged his house early this morning. And this is being reported by various media outlets as well that have correspondents on the ground there. We are also receiving reports that telecommunications and internet outages have been reported in Khartoum as the military coup gets underway in Sudan, with ministers in the PM's government also arrested. Actually, a Twitter handle or a website that monitors internet access in various countries and reporting that there has been an outage there in Khartoum as well. And so this is information we are receiving at the moment. And of course, this also takes us back to 2018 when there was a lot of unrest in Sudan from December 2018 when the then President Bashir's government imposed emergency austerity measures to try to starve off an economic collapse. Citizens went to the streets in protests and the protests continued for a couple of months as well up until 6th of April when 6th of April of the next year, that's in 2019, when demonstrators occupied the square in front of the military's headquarters to demand that the army force the president out. Now, 5 days later, the military announced that the president had been overthrown. And after that, Sudan has been in a state of flux, trying to figure out the way forward after that. And today we are receiving reports that a military coup is underway about 3 years since the military announced that President Bashir, at that time the president, had been overthrown. And of course, this is just a key sign of the state of democracy and the flux of stability of nations on the African continent with different countries in transitions through various ways. I don't know if any of my guests here in studio would like to give a brief comment on that. Let me introduce my guests. We actually have a big panel ready for our discussion this morning. On my left, we have Honorable Opiyo Wandayi, MP Ugunja. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Mauri.
And next to him is Honorable Robert Mbui, MP Kadhiani. Thank you for finding time this morning. We also have John Kagushia, who's the Speaker in Nyeri County. Asante sana.
Good morning.
For joining us. And joining us a bit later on Skype will be the Senator of Meru County, Mithika Linturi. Gentlemen, African continent, still different countries at different stages of this democratic process. I know we don't have all the details about Sudan, but maybe a comment from you, Honorable Wandayi?
Well, Wahiga, you know what's happening, or what is reported to be happening in the Sudan is basically a culmination of a long process of misrule, if I may call it so. You know, the al-Bashir state was never completely vanquished. And he left in place very deep tentacles, even though he is on his way, I'm told, to The Hague. And therefore, it will take a long time for the Sudan state to stabilize. And again, this is also an indication of the effects of militarizing state. Yes, and we need to continue to develop a culture of professionalism within the military across the continent. But more critically, we must entrench democracy, yes, in its true sense, such that if there are such transitions, as we saw in after the Bashir ouster, we should have had mechanisms to very quickly put in place a civilian government with the mandate of the people. It's not just enough to have people clad in civilian attire calling themselves civilian government. They must enjoy the mandate of the people. Yes.
Honorable Mbui, African countries have been under pressure over the last 50 years to entrench democracy at a time when states like the United States have had 100, 200 years to do so. Some have said maybe Africa should come up with its own democratic model. Others have said the pressures of Africa, unfortunately will lead to some of the transitions that you see in different countries. Today it's Sudan, tomorrow it could be a different country as well. What are your thoughts on this, even as we receive this news out of Sudan?
Wahiga, I come from a family of the late General Jackson Kimeu Mulinge, who quashed a military coup in Kenya, and who was actually, as head of military, tried to ensure that Kenya's military was extremely disciplined and maintained law and order. And actually, the reality is that this issue of military coups is something we all need to condemn, because for whatever reason, I think democracy must be given an opportunity to thrive. And any time the military gets involved and tries to take over power, it doesn't improve the stakes of a country. I think that's one of the things that we need to look at. And for prosperity, I think democracy does work. So I would advise that the people of Sudan find ways of getting to elect their own government and support their own government, so that the military would be best placed to stay in the barracks and only get involved whenever there's external aggression.
John Kagushia, what are your thoughts on this? Do you think African countries have really tapped into democracy as was originally envisioned? Are we still trying to figure it out, and that's why you see incidents like events like this occurring as they have done, whether it was Egypt, at different times, Sudan, etc.?
Well, I think we have a challenge, and this seems to be a challenge that is coming back. From 1956 all the way to around early 2000s, it is reported that we had well over 108 attempted coups, and 80 of them were successful. And of course, except for the Arab uprising that we saw recently, we have had the coups going down until I think about 3 years ago, 2019, when we are seeing on average almost like 3-4 coups almost every other year. In this year alone, in May, we had a successful coup in Mali. Of course, we had another one that was not successful in Niger. We had a transfer of power from through military means in Chad, and of course, in that case, we also had we also had to lose a president. We had also another successful coup in September this year in Guinea, and that is just about 2 months ago. Most of us will remember about it. And so we are seeing a situation where Africa had come up in a very good way. Democratization had taken root in Africa from around early 2000s. But from the last about 3-4 years, we are seeing the democratization is now going down again. And we see a lot of coups across the countries in Africa. And that is something that must now put us to ask ourselves very hard questions. Now you see it has come next door here in Sudan. And as a country here, and especially the East African region, we need to ensure first we refocus ourselves so much on democratization. Of course, you know what we saw happening in Uganda the other day. And we have also had the issue of failed elections in many other countries. So these are some of the areas as African countries that we have to focus on very seriously, so that we can bring back this continent onto the rule of law, whereby the democracy is entrenched, and that people will respect proper elections. And also the ruling class has also to ensure that they are doing proper governance of their countries, so that we don't have to have military coups and also civilian uprising across the African continent. It's something that we must all be very concerned about.
I think in 2020, and thank you, John Kagushia, for that incisive analysis, and my other guests here as well. I think democracy, while many thought is a destination, actually seems to be more of a journey, and different African countries are on different stages of that journey. One last update before we switch gears and come back closer home. We're also receiving reports out of Sudan that an internet connectivity report shows a significant disruption affecting cellular and fixed line connectivity on multiple platforms and providers. And as I mentioned earlier, internet and telecommunications outages being reported out of Sudan as well. And we'll give you more details as and when we get them in regards to the situation in neighboring Sudan. But closer home, a lot has been happening over the last 1 week, gentlemen. The last time you came here, people had to adhere to a curfew. Now they don't, and other matters as well. What were your highlights of the last 1 week, political or non-political? Let's start with you, Honorable Wandai. Highlights of the last 7 days, in your view. What stood out for you?
Well,
whether exciting or not.
Well, the most eventful thing, in my view, is the lifting of the curfew, which has, of course, enabled life to be back to normal. But again, on the political scene, we have seen heightened activities, especially from two formations: the progressive formation led by Raila Odinga and the reactionary formation led by D.P. Ruto and his team.
What did you call his formation?
Reactionary, yeah.
Okay.
You will come to agree with me that what we have witnessed this past 1 week is basically what a precursor or to what is likely to happen in the coming weeks, months and months. And it's coming clear again that the country is going to have an interesting campaign season. Yes, once the election campaign proper begins.
That's your highlight of the week?
Yes,
so far. Honorable Mbui, what's yours?
I think my observation has been the attitude of our people when it comes to elections. You know, it's a very interesting thing to note that elections are very far from now. I think we are talking about 10 months. The electioneering period is actually in law, and there will be a time when the people will be allowed to go out there and seek votes. But the highlights, I would say, is that politics has taken over the country. I mean, right now, everybody wakes up, breakfast, lunch, dinner is politics. I mean, that's what's happening. We've moved to that season, and I think it's unfortunate that we've been in this season almost since 2020, last elections, 2017. Just immediately after the elections, the campaigns for 2022 started. So my highlight is that campaigns have been on and still continue to be at the top of the table. The president's announcement that we lift the curfew was very good for the can I say the general public and the business community, but for politicians, it was business as usual. You know, huge rallies were still going on despite the ban and all that. So my highlight is that thank God now the rest of Kenyans can
do what politicians have been doing have been doing for some time.
Now under the law, yes.
now under the law. Honorable Kagushia, what was your highlight this past 1 week?
According to Honorable Wandai, in the progressive system of Raila Odinga, Junet Mohammed in Nyanza announced and actually warned a cabinet secretary in a public political rally that the government is going to Nyanza in the progressive system, and when it goes to Nyanza in the coming few days, my Honorable Minister Mutahi Kagwe will have to get a visa to go to Nyanza, because the government will be of the people of Nyanza, and every other person will be a visitor. They will be a guest to the government.
That was your reading of that statement?
It's not just the reading.
I need to respond.
He said
to
it, I'm saying it verbatim. Maybe the only thing I've added is a visa. But he said that one has to be a guest now to the coming government. Progressive government, a government for the country of the Republic of Kenya, said in front of a cabinet secretary of the government of the day. And I think that is not, to me, is not progressive. I think it is very retrogressive. As a country, we must focus on an inclusive government that brings on board all Kenyans, where Kenyans don't have to feel as guests in their own government. Why? Because they cast their vote. Whether they cast the vote to the affirmative of the government that comes on board, or they cast their vote against the government that comes on board, they must be allowed to feel as part of the government. And I think that is one of the things we have seen with the former President Kibaki. Also another thing we have also seen even with the President Uhuru Kenyatta. They have allowed every Kenyan to feel as part of the government. So these warnings that now the government we are taking it over, and yet the performance in terms of popularity in the country, Raila Odinga is not even having 45%. He's well below 30%. And now we already have people chest thumping that the government that is coming on board, you're going to be guests, and you're telling that a cabinet secretary. What about us, the minions and the people who are at the bottom of the pyramid? Okay. What is going to happen to us?
Let me allow Honorable Wandai to respond. The numbers that you've given, percentages, I think you're quoting who pollsters.
And again,
or you've conducted your own poll.
No, we have a lot of intelligence that we have on how the presidential candidates are faring.
Let me hear from Honorable Wandai.
I think Wahiga, you will help by taking the debate a little bit higher than where my friend Mr. Kagushia wants to take it. You know, again, before we blow out of proportion the purported Honorable Junet's remarks, you must understand, first and foremost, the context in which he was speaking. I wasn't there, but really, you must understand the context in which he was speaking. As somebody who knows Honorable Junet, I think we're basically making a joke. And more importantly, you know, Honorable Junet doesn't speak for ODM. He's not true ODM spokesman. Neither is he Raila Odinga spokesperson. So the jokes he was making are basically personal jokes, which basically mean nothing really. And therefore, to harp on them and try to use them as a campaign issue is really to sink very low, in my view. And we need to avoid that. Yeah, we can take this debate higher we are responsible and respectable leaders, including the Speaker himself. I think the Speaker of Nyeri County Assembly.
And I'm not playing a joke here.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm
so and to pick it up from there, Wahiga, this past 1 week again, as I said earlier, has demonstrated that we are in for very interesting campaigns based on issues purely. I happen to have been on the trail of the tour of Excellency Raila Odinga in Kiambu on Thursday, I think, yeah. And I moved with him all the way from Githunguri to Ruiru to Kiambu town. Kenyans of all walks of life who really want to listen to the agenda that is being placed on the table by political leaders who want to govern them. And that is a very, very positive sign, if you ask me. And Kenyans in their numbers really came out, turned out in large numbers to listen to this very progressive agenda that I've been talking about. And you know, you don't just become progressive overnight, or neither do you just become retrogressive or reactionary overnight. It has got a history here. A leader has to be judged based on his or her history. And Raila Odinga has got a history, a record that speaks for itself. And so do others also. Yes, including my good friend, of course, Hagoshia and his leader. Yeah, they have got their history and records, which speak for themselves, and you cannot really revise that history.
Okay.
Yes, that's very important for Kenyans to understand. Yeah.
And even as we elevate this discussion, as yes. Honorable Ndai has called us to do, one incident of concern this past weekend was in regards to an incident that happened in Busia. We know that as of yesterday, 8 suspects were arrested over links to chaos that marred Deputy President Ruto's rally in Busia, with CS Matiang'i saying that more arrests are expected. We've had various politicians commenting on this. I'd like to hear some of those sound bites once again. We had the Deputy President speaking to it. We've had Musalia Mudavadi also just sort of warning young people not to be used at a time like this. Let's listen to what they had to say in regards to that.
Actors who are paying children of other citizens to cause violence and throw stones, we are telling you, shame on you. This country is going to change. And I want to ask the young people of our nation, nauliza vijana wote wa taifa letu la Kenya, ya kwamba safari hii tutahakikisha ya kwamba Kenya inabadilika.
Our children to be part of a retrogressive process. Our youngsters to be used because they may never have experienced what happened in 2007, 2008. Some of them may not have known. But those of us who are able to see the consequences, let us say never again should we walk that path.
When I spoke to the regional commissioner, we already had arrested 5 people related to that incident that involved the Deputy President in Busia. And I have asked the security team there to look for everyone who was involved in that organization, even if they are political leaders, whether they're elected members of parliament or not, I don't care. Arrest them, we take them to court. No one is allowed to disrupt meetings, and we cannot allow those types of things to happen. We know what that has done to our country before when we had those kinds of jokes. We started like that in 2007, and you know where we ended. Safari hii, we will not wait and procrastinate. We will act with speed and firmly on all those things.
Honorable Mbui, before Wandai comes, Honorable Mbui, we've had various commentators suggest that this time around our democracy has developed. We have seen the Deputy President campaigning in Nyanza, for example, relatively, sort of uneventful campaign, so to speak. We've seen ODM leader Raila Odinga in central Kenya, and whereas in the past, there may have been reactions to this, it seems by and large that various political camps feel comfortable moving to different parts of the country. So what do you then make of the events that we've seen this weekend? Does that concern you as a parliamentarian?
It actually does, Waiga. It does, because really at the end of the day, the most important thing that want to seek as leaders in this country is peace and tranquility. We cannot grow our economy if there's chaos. And I like what the CS Matiang'i has said about the post-election violence. It starts like that, like a joke. Really, I want to say that it's unfortunate that in the Kenyan situation, when a leader has a public meeting and there's a lot of people, somehow in the minds of the opponents, it seems to translate to votes. And you know, the reality is that if 10 people are competing for a seat and 10 people go to a market, all the people of that market should go and listen to the 10 people. It doesn't mean that when you have a bigger crowd, it means that then therefore you have more votes. And I think that's what is happening. So some people are unhappy that maybe when one goes and a big crowd forms around them, it means that they are ahead. And I think I've had a colleague here say that, you know, polls are saying, probably these polls are based on those things, those groupings. You look at someone is coming out of the car in the market, there's 1,000, 2,000 people in the market cheering, so they think, wow, now we are ahead. The reality is that Kenyans have to understand, listen to everyone, listen to every agenda. At the end of the day, also make an informed decision. Because if you don't listen to leaders, you will not know whether they have it in them to take you to the next level. If you chase them away, you also don't get to know whether they don't even have it in them in the first place. So I am concerned that this is still happening in today's day and age. I think the government needs to really put its best foot forward and ensure that those that were involved, if there was any planned disruption, they let them be dealt with accordingly, so that it discourages other people from doing that. Otherwise, if you do this, we ethnicize the country. Because that would mean that any of the presidential candidates who comes to our region, we will be chasing them because we have our own Kalonzo Musyoka. So I think it's important that because we will accord them respect when they come to Machakos, to Kitui, to Makueni, to the regions where we are, we also want to receive the same when we go to Baringo, to Kajiado, to every other place. So I think it's important that we be tolerant. And I think in case there was somebody who was who paid these young men and women to come out and do that, it's also, I would also say it's a big shame.
Speaker Kagushia,
Yeah,
I'm coming to Speaker Kagushia.
Yeah.
Eight arrests so far over the chaos. Is that enough?
No, it's a joke. This is retrogressive, and this is a kind of politics we are saying we don't want in the country. It's quite retrogressive. It's not progressive at all. And it is not the first time it is happening. It also happened again in my county, Nyeri County, when the deputy president had come to Kieni, Bereri. Some young people were hired by some of the politicians who are becoming highly intolerant. Yeah? And unfortunately, they are identifying themselves with the unity arrangements in the country. And what we are seeing is a very, very planned and organized attack on other political rallies and campaigns. And it is not right. I know my governor did condemn it, and I do today also condemn it very seriously. I also condemn what has happened in Busia, and this must stop. And the arrests of 8 people is tokenism. And what I think we need to do is that the political class must come to this point where they condemn this kind of violence. I'm yet to hear, for example, like the ODM leader condemning this violence. I think it's very important. Can you imagine if, for example, someone came to Kerugoya at Wanguru Stadium and they were stoned? Can you imagine what that would have portended? It is not right. It needs to be condemned in a very serious, with the strongest term possible. And we actually need to prevent this from happening. And it is possible. The government normally has its own intelligence. And unfortunately, like in some of the scenarios, we have seen this happening when some of the government officers are actually watching. And so I'm happy about what Matiang'i has said and the kind of step he's taking. But he needs to do a preventive measure on this one. And as a country, I don't think we need to joke around with the issue of violence. Because if we encourage this happening on one side, what will happen if the other side also now prepares themselves to do the same kind of an attack? It will bring us back to a worse situation than where we were in 2007. So I expect that every other political leader is going to condemn this, and it's not going to be allowed, and the government is going to get very serious. I know we may have had an issue where the government may have seen to not to be very serious about politicians whom they don't support, or maybe the system that doesn't support. But I think now where we are getting to, it can get very volatile. It can get extremely toxic with our Kenyans, young people, and even people who are not very busy sometimes and are waiting for these kind of instructions. So as a government, it's very important that we take action on a very serious note. And also to maybe add on the issue of the curfew, I want to really congratulate the government for having lifted the curfew in the last 1 week. It really is going to help us raise the economy once again and the people who have been suffering, especially in the hospitality industry. And I want to say this is a good move. The curfew had outlived its usefulness. Most of the countries across the globe had already lifted their curfews, and what most of the other countries now are concentrating on is vaccination of their citizens. And I'm happy that the government is now back on its feet on vaccinations, and now it has done away with this curfew. I think it's something that we really need to be happy about and congratulate the government.
Thank you for that. I know we're almost due for a break, but let me allow Honorable Wandai to speak his mind on this political intolerance concerns that have been raised this weekend.
Well, Mwaura, really it is no-brainer. We can't allow violence to take root in this country, be it political violence or otherwise. And you have a history, again, of these kind of things. I think I'm the oldest on this panel in terms of participating in the activism. As a youth activist, all the way from 1992, 1997 elections, there are areas in this country where you would not really access during campaigns. And over time, we have managed to deal with that. So it must be made very clear that no particular individual, no particular party or grouping owns any particular region in this country. That every person has got the right to visit every part of this country. And violence has to be condemned. But Mwaura, as we condemn violence, we must condemn violence in a holistic manner. Because violence is violence, regardless of who perpetrates it. Mwaura, as we speak from one side of our mouths, we must also be careful that even as we do so, there are people who through violence were uprooted from their properties in this country, in parts of this country. They were uprooted from their farms and they are living as squatters and as refugees in other parts of the country. Yet those who uprooted them are still occupying those farms illegally. We haven't heard anybody condemning those acts or making efforts to return those people who are removed forcefully from their farms to their farms. We must do this thing in a holistic manner. Let's not cherry pick violence, where you go somewhere, run into some problems, then you start shouting. And yet there are people who are not living in their farms because they were evicted forcefully through violence. That is violence, Mwaura. And it has to be condemned. And it has to be managed. And the police need to move in with speed, even as they deal with these small hooligans. And move with speed and deal with those big hooligans who evicted Kenyans from their rightful property.
Would you just say all hooligans, whether small or big?
Yes, they are bigger ones who evicted people from their farms.
Indeed, I think I support that a lot, that we need to condemn violence wholesomely. We need to condemn violence. Anyone who may have uprooted another person from their farm, that need to be condemned. And in fact, the government need to make arrangements for such kind of people to go back to their farm.
Correct.
We need to condemn violence where people are uprooted from their rental houses, where they were landlords and they were renting these households or these houses to be able to earn a living and educate their children. And they were evicted from these houses in this city. And when they are evicted, they are sent into oblivion. They're supposed to go and now do small makeshift houses elsewhere. And yet they were landlords. We need to condemn this violence wholesomely in every corner of this country.
Gentlemen, I think on that, you want to say something before? or you're listening to the undertones of...
I'm just listening to the undertones, and I can tell you, I can see a direct collision here. When you talk about those landlords and you talk about those evicted from their lands. But Waiga, I am a victim of political violence. My friend will tell you they broke my leg, I was shot, broken. Because of politics. So it's something that...
What year was this?
This was just immediately after the elections of 2017. Even up to now, I have a metal rod in my leg that holds the bones together out of political violence. But I wanted to just say this, that sometimes when you look at these cases, and this is really important, political leaders have been known sometimes to stage manage some of these attacks for sympathy reasons. And I am not saying anything about the Busia one. I'm just talking about the general observation.
And in the run-up to the
That
election,
there are
it's
people
possible.
do a lot of that, a lot of stage managing. You go to a place, you arrange 2-3 young men to throw stones, make sure that they don't hit my car, but just throw the stones that they are seen by the media. And then you go to the media and say, look, now I'm being attacked. And you know what? Actually, that translates to sympathy votes. It's a campaign gimmick also. I'm not saying about Busia, but I'm saying it does happen.
I think
so we have to be careful that we don't blow this out of proportion. Let I think the security forces need to investigate thoroughly and probably give us a good report of who exactly was the one behind the paymaster behind this thing. Because whoever is arrested and was paid, someone paid them. Who paid them? You might be shocked that sometimes the paymaster is the victim himself.
At least what we know now.
Is it possible that the political class for many years has benefited from jobless, unemployed youth,
Yes.
government after government, that are always available for tasks like this?
Yes.
And thus, doesn't the political class stand guilty?
Of course they do. You definitely, you never see political rallies in Runda, do you? Not even in Gigiri. I mean, what we know about the political violence in Busia is that according to Matiang'i, our cabinet secretary, 8 people have been arrested. Yesterday, the CS again was in Nyandarua, opening some TV station there. And what he said is that they're going to crack down on all the vernacular radio stations and TV stations that are fanning violence. And in a way, he kind of directly almost related that kind of violence to what was happening in Busia. And he also took the swipe on those people who conducted that violence there. And now, as we talk, the police have these people in custody. There seems to be some connection also with some fanning of violence, ethnic violence in some quarters. And it's clear, and the cabinet secretary himself did allude to this. So I don't think there's something that is secret. I don't think it's something that we don't know about. It's not something that you're supposed to be second guessing. It's something that was a political attack. And it's something that has also been condemned by most, not all, of the political leaders. And I wish that all the political leaders can condemn that kind of violence. But it is true, politicians do take advantage of the Kenyans who may not have benefited from access to opportunities. And this is where I say, and I say it again, I have said it before, Kenyans don't need to put these political activities in their hearts. Politicians don't. If you look at what was happening in Kerugoya, and by the way, it was a missed opportunity. There was, we are told there was some kind of planned endorsement in that forum, but for some reason it did not take place. Now, I will not elaborate further, Honorable Wandai. But nevertheless, if you looked at how the ODM leader did receive the deputy president, and they greeted each other with a lot of warmth. And when the function was going on, His Excellency the President did call the deputy president, and they had tete-a-tete, and we could see them greet each other and laugh and smile and joke, and they looked like they were easy with each other. And yet, some of the Kenyans do take these things to their hearts, and for that reason, they are ready to be used by other politicians to cause havoc in these kind of political rallies, or even in their own environment where they live. It is not right, and Kenyans need to take these issues with a pinch of salt. They just need to be in their mind. You see what happens today, and you move on, and tomorrow just get into your activities. Don't put these things into the heart. The political leaders do not fight. They, in fact, sit together, eat together, drink together, and they respect each other. Today, if one of them had a problem, you will see the whole political class. Didn't you see what happened with Musalia Mudavadi when he had a loss? The whole political class was at home to console him, and even attended even the burial. And it was, you could see every other politician who counted in the country was there, meaning these people respect each other, they cry together, they laugh together, even in weddings, ceremonies where they're enjoying. So Kenyans need to know this. They must not allow themselves to be used by politicians.
Okay, and on that note, I think let's take our first break on the program. And I wanted to read, I saw an interesting tweet here from, I think it's Engineer Lazaro Kanyambok, always watching the program. Thanks so much for tuning in. Let me see here. You say cases of political thuggery should be dealt with accordingly. Our mature democracy allows everyone to visit all corners of the nation. I congratulate Nyanza for displaying political maturity so far. Thank you so much for that comment. Let me see what else you are saying this morning. Let me see. Jacob Abere Matlala, Israel, you say, it's very primitive to see politicians hiring younglings to engage chaos and violence in rallies. We've seen it in different parts of the country. Kama hauna kazi, kaa kwenu, usitumike na mwanasiasa kuonyesha okay, I haven't understood. I think there's a typo there. But I think you get the message by and large. And so on that note, I think we can take our first break. But we want to give you updates on that breaking news out of Sudan, what we know so far this morning. And this is being reported by the Reuters news agency and other news outlets as well. Sudan's Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok has been put under house arrest after an unidentified military force besieged his house early on Monday, according to Al Hadath TV. I think we have some images. We can play them now. The Sudanese network cited unnamed sources, and an independent confirmation was not immediately available. Let me give it to you one more time. Sudan's Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok was put under house arrest this morning after an unidentified military force besieged his house early on Monday. This is according to a Sudanese network known as Al Hadath TV. Now, the reported move against Hamdok came shortly after Sudan's military arrested several civilian officials, including cabinet ministers, the Prime Minister's media advisor, and a member of the country's ruling Sovereign Council. That's a picture of Sudan's Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok, as I mentioned, put under house arrest. Now, you will note that Sudan has been on edge since a failed coup last month unleashed bitter recrimination between the military and civilian groups meant to be sharing power following the toppling of the country's longtime leader, Omar al-Bashir. So these are the details that we have so far. That gentleman, the Prime Minister, under house arrest, his ministers, also several of them in a similar situation at this time, with a military coup underway in Sudan just a month after a failed coup last month. We'll give you more updates as and when we get them. But on that note, let's take our first break. When we come back, we've got a lot more to talk about. There's a new movement. It's called the Strugglers Movement. What's the place of lobby groups in our political dispensation at a time like this? Also, the Standard reporting that Mudavadi under pressure to support Raila. Is Kalonzo also under pressure to support Raila? We'll find out from my guest in studio when we come back. We've got a lot more to talk about. You're watching Daybreak. Stay with us. We'll be right back.